Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm here at the beginning of another week to share on another topic. This week, I'm going to talk about promises of God from the Old Testament, and then next week, I'll talk about promises of God from the New Testament. Now, I don't know about you, but lots of people make promises. Many people make promises they don't have any intention of keeping. They just, well, I don't know why. But it's important when you or I give our word and promise something that we fulfill it. We carry it out at least as best as we can. Sometimes people depend on our promises. I promised my wife I will love her for as long as we're alive, and she can count on that one, or at least she better be able to, and vice versa. And people don't like folks who promise something and then ignore it. I don't. I'm sure you don't either. And the Bible is a book full of promises. Now, if you remember in the beginning, the Garden of Eden, or whatever the place was really actually like, God and man walked together in the cool of the day and talked and fellowshiped. And there wasn't any reason for worry or being concerned about deception or anything like that. It just didn't exist. And then, of course, sin entered in the world. And ever since, it's been a time of broken promises by lots of folks, and lots of bad things happen. But yet, in the midst of all of that, God's promises have remained secure. And so today I want to look at one from Deuteronomy chapter 31. Now, here we find that the people of Israel are about to enter the promised land. Now, this is a promise that's, oh goodness, thousands of years old. And you think that maybe God forgot about it, but he didn't. And so we read in verse 8 of chapter 31 these words: Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will never fail you nor abandon you. How many times in your life have you been afraid? Well, if you're kind of like me, maybe more than you can count. And sometimes those fears were sort of goofy, like a little kid who's afraid to go to sleep because there's a monster under the bed. And sometimes they're pretty serious, like you get a really bad report from a doctor and your future looks bleak. Or when things go wrong in your work schedule or your business or your career, and you think you might lose everything. Or even worse, what happens in times of war when everything somebody owns gets destroyed by one bomb and they didn't have anything to do with it. Worry and fear is a big problem for people, for you and for me. It's part of our human lives. And maybe there's some who go through life and never worry or fear about anything. I don't know. I've never really met anybody like that. And so this promise becomes so important, helpful, valuable, whatever term you want to add here. It says, do not be afraid or discouraged. Now, I looked it up one time, and I think there are over 360 verses in the Bible that say, don't be afraid. Many times that's the first thing Jesus said when he met his disciples. And it's this thing that God says to his prophets and his people over and over again. Just don't be afraid. Now, fear is caused by the inability to do what we want, or the inability to control circumstances so that whatever happens is what we wanted to happen. And if you think about it, there's lots that fit into that category. Even something as simply as raising children. You never know how they're going to turn out. And I've had parents for years tell me how wonderful their kids were and tell me how unwonderful their kids were. You, it's just kind of the way life goes. People make choices. And sometimes those choices that someone else makes affects our lives. But even when someone is determined to do you harm, this passage, this promise comes to be. Do not be afraid and don't be discouraged. Now, why can we not be afraid and not be discouraged? Is it because we're so wonderful and we're so gifted with great abilities? Well, I don't know, maybe. But that's not what this verse says. It goes on to say, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. Now, it's hard to see God in a personal way, particularly if you're struggling, and particularly if you've never given him the time of day. It's hard to believe that this force that created everything that we know of, that force cares about you so much that he will personally go ahead of you. Now, if he's doing that for all 6+ or 7 billion people in the world, how does he do that? Well, I don't know. That's not my problem. That's his. But the promise is that we don't have to fear or worry because he goes before us. And then it says, he will be with you. He will neither fail nor abandon you. Now, if you're like me, people have failed me. People I counted on. People I trusted. I still remember some folks from my first church years, a long time ago, that I really, really trusted. And that trust wasn't founded. It was destroyed by some things that I had nothing to do with. But yet, wherever you are in life, whatever your circumstances, it says here, the promise is that God will neither fail you nor abandon you, and that you don't have to worry because he goes out before you. Now you think about that for a minute. What difference would your life be if you lived out the belief in this promise? What do you think about that? I'll be back tomorrow with some other thoughts. I hope you have a really great week. If you have any needs or concerns, let us know. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow.